everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Emma Monahan. I am a senior researcher at Chapin Hall, and I am thrilled to be here with my colleagues to share this toolkit we created to provide supports and resources for human service agencies aiming to build sustainable data use in their organizations. You will receive a PDF of these slides and a recording after the webinar. And I know a lot of you have already put your name and organization in the chat. If you haven't already, please, we encourage you to do so. And if you have questions throughout the webinar, you should see a Q&A option on the bottom of your screen. Please use that to submit your questions, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the webinar. So thank you for being here. With that, we are going to jump in, and I will pass it to Melissa.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Wavelet, and I work at the Social Policy Research and Evaluation nonprofit called MDRC that's celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. It is headquartered in New York City, and I am joining you today from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm really pleased to be here and welcome my co-presenters, Emily Wiegand, Rosie Gagan, and Emma Monahan from Chapin Hall. And we're going to talk to you about the TANF Data Collaborative project and the toolkit that resulted from it. Next slide. So MDRC was the lead contractor for this project, but we could not have done it alone. And we have these awesome partners listed on this slide, including Chapin Hall, Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy from the University of Pennsylvania, and the Coleridge Initiative. None of this would have been possible without funding from our federal partners in the Administration for Children and Families, in the offices of Family Assistance and Planning, Research, and Evaluation. So not only did they give us some money, they also gave us considerable ideas and collaboration and thought partnership. So why this toolkit? What got us thinking about this? What motivated the development of the toolkit? So Chapin Hall conducted a national needs assessment survey at the very beginning of the TANF Data Innovation Project. And our experiences, both professionally and personally, in working with organizations who care about data analytics. And then we spent 30 months with 8 state and local TANF agencies in a pilot delivering supports as they completed data analytics project. And we learned firsthand how challenging it is to sustain practices, knowledge, and infrastructure to do this routinely more than once. And so that was some of the motivation for the toolkit. So next slide. So when I talk about sustainability and why it matters, here's a visual to help leave you with an impression. So this is a series of steps that any data analytics project team goes through. An episodic data analysis is a series of discrete steps. First, you ask the question, then you access the data. Third, you learn about the data, you understand what's available, what's not, what's complete, what's measured. Then you prepare the data for analysis, and fifth, you analyze it and share the results. In an agency or unit where the processes, the people, the infrastructure is more sustainable, this set of discrete steps becomes more of a flow, and you move through them more quickly from the time of question to the results. So the steps are the same, but the speed at which your team completes them is faster. So as is the case with any analysis, you start with a question on the left, you then access your data, but in this case, your data is already secured. You already know the data perhaps, and you understand the data quality. And so the data preparation builds on prior analyses and may even reuse code. And that enables the team to more quickly analyze the data and share the results. Okay, next slide. So 2 ways, speaking of data, 2 ways we collected data for this toolkit was, 1, we conducted a literature review. And secondly, we had a number of conversations with state TANF agencies and their external partners to learn about which strategies have been most successful in their journeys to sustain data analytics work. And that information was used to produce this toolkit. So this is the table of contents. Think of it like a trailer to the movie. It gives you a sense of the breadth of the topics in the toolkit that you can dig into, even though we won't have time to cover them all today. And now I will pass the mic to Emily.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to take a minute and talk about the big picture and set up how we think about sustainability in the space of public sector data use. So firstly, sustainability comprises two big components: demand, or the interest in analytic products from various stakeholders, and capacity, the ability to generate analyses and create those products. When we talk about building data use, we often concentrate only on the capacity side of the equation, but that demand piece is key because that's how analytic findings reach the people who can use and apply them. When you have demand and you don't have capacity, then you have a lack of information. But when you have capacity without demand, you have analyses that aren't informing programs, and they're not making the difference they're supposed to make. Now, other than these two big components of capacity and demand, our approach to sustainability doesn't assume any other firm prerequisites. From what we've seen, different agencies and jurisdictions succeed in having sustainable data use with all different mixes of pieces, depending on their context. So instead, we approach sustainability as a weave. On one axis, we have demand, on the other axis, capacity. If you think about a woven cloth, a cloth is stronger when you have more threads or when the individual threads themselves are stronger. And the same is true here. So if you want to strengthen demand for analytics in your context, you want to grow the number of stakeholders, and you want to deepen the engagement of those stakeholders with analytics and with data. On the capacity side, you want to grow the number of capacities, and you also want to strengthen the individual capacities. But there's no single thread, no one capacity or no one stakeholder that's essential. If there's a thread that's missing or that's broken or that doesn't work in your context, your cloth can still hold and you can still have sustainable data use. Because we take this approach and use this framework, the toolkit's built to be very modular, with the idea that you'll identify the threads that you're looking to develop or to strengthen in your context, and then jump right to the strategies and tools that will help you in those areas. I'm going to turn it over now to Rosie and Emma, who will talk through that structure in more detail.
Great, thank you, Emily. So the strategies that we heard about in our conversations with state agencies and their partners fall into 6 main areas of focus. Next slide, please. The first is fostering demand for data. So this is really about how to garner support from different levels of leadership. Next, we have developing strong external partnerships. This can be really helpful, when an agency doesn't have the in-house capacity to conduct data analyses. Sometimes they can outsource that to an external partner. Improving knowledge management and documentation. So this can include developing code books, data dictionaries, and also, knowledge management. So when somebody leaves the organization, we don't want all their knowledge to leave with them. Next, we have building staff capacity. So this is about hiring and retaining analytic staff, as well as helping to foster data literacy in some of the staff you already have. Improving internal communication, especially between staff with different roles, like program staff who are non-analytic and data scientist or data analyst. And finally, securing funding, both from the state or other sources. So since we probably only have time to talk about 1, maybe 2 of these today, we thought it would make sense to talk about the areas that are most of interest to our audience. So we have a poll, and you can identify which topics are most of interest to you. And after that, you can direct yourselves to the toolkit to look at the rest of the strategies. Okay, we'll take a little while so everybody has time to complete the poll. Okay, great. It looks like, okay, so if we have one topic, it looks like it's strategies to improve knowledge management and documentation. Yep, that's a thorny one. And maybe we'll go with strategies to build staff capacity if we have time. Okay. So So documentation is a central part of sustainable data use. Preserving knowledge, not only of data sets, but also of code and policies and processes, is critical to expanding and applying evidence. Documentation is also the area where state agencies most frequently told us that they struggled. And I think this is because when knowledge is fresh, right, documentation feels like a luxury. I don't have time to write about this thing that I just did. I need to move on to produce the next product. But when knowledge fades, documentation really becomes a burden because it's not fresh in your mind anymore. So some of the strategies we heard to work on this included first, centralizing and sharing resources, identifying a single source of truth that is, the definitive source of documentation that everybody agrees on is really key. We also heard about establishing documentation as a routine part of staff responsibilities and analyses. So writing things down, updating code books, developing data dictionaries, it can really help if you say, tell your staff, look, this is part of the job. It's not a luxury. It's not something we do if we have time. Documentation is a product. So it's really important that we do this. It's part of the job. And finally, using automation as much as possible. So at its most sophisticated, this can look like its own database for documentation. We heard from the state that we think was really leading on this. We have a quote, "Now we organize reference information as data in a relational database to facilitate transparency and ongoing maintenance of definitions, and so that staff don't need to find the code to use the measurement concept." And if the idea of a relational database just went over your head a little bit, that's totally fine. This may not be feasible for you. Again, this is the state that we really think is leading on this. I would add to this, just be patient. Any documentation is far better than none. So one Word doc in SharePoint that everybody updates and writes in is way better than nothing. And it looks like we probably don't have time to talk about another topic today, but again, you can direct yourself to the toolkit. All of the other topics are available, the strategies in there. And I'm going to pass it to Emma so that she can actually demonstrate some of the tools.
Thank you, Rosie. So I am going to give another brief high-level overview of the tools. And again, when you really want to dig into them, we encourage you to click on the link in the chat and look at the toolkit yourself. But next slide. There are 5 tools, and we really designed these to be interactive, to be like worksheets or self-assessment so that you can use them, and they provide concrete resources to support you growing your sustainable data use. The first is the sustainable data use self-assessment. It's a moment to personally reflect on you or your organization and identify which areas of sustainability you might need to most improve in, and then it will direct you to the relevant areas of the toolkit. There's a tool with sample language for job descriptions and a tool with sample language for interviews. We know from personal experience and talking with folks that it's often hard to write an accurate job description or ask questions to elicit the right skills from interview candidates. And these are really aimed to help you do both of those things. There's a tool for identifying the right training programs. So it's a worksheet that can guide you through the questions to ask yourself, your staff, for then identifying the right training opportunities to build the analytic skills internally that you might need. And then finally, there's a documentation checklist. We really like this tool. I'm going to preview it to you in a second. So let's go to the next slide. So this one is a snapshot of one portion of a tool that you will find for crafting the job description. It's organized by areas of a job description, and within each area, you will see sample language for a potential job description if you're aiming to make an analytic hire. So for example, you can see here that when listing required technical competencies in a job description, this tool would give you sample language for describing those technical competencies, and you could pull these and edit based on what kind of analytic needs you are looking for. Next slide. And then this one is a quick look at a tool that can help you craft interview questions, particularly when interviewing a candidate for an analytic hire. So there's a large bank of sample questions that we pulled from a lot of the folks we interviewed. They had questions that did a good job of eliciting this or that. And so you can use it as a starting point to either further specify questions or edit slightly to meet the needs of your hire. The sample questions are really aimed to help you identify in an interview process if the candidate has the skills needed to conduct data analysis with complex systems and in a collaborative manner. And then finally, here's another tool that we really think is useful. It's the checklist to guide documentation. So We know documentation is critical to ensuring data use is sustainable, but it's often hard to think through everything that you might need to document. And so this tool is really there to help you think about an analytic project or process from beginning to end and identify if you have all of the needed elements of documentation clear and complete for that process. So that was brief, but again, please dig into the tool. You can get a better sense by looking at them. Next slide. But we wanted to take a pause here and invite our panelists forward. So we are so grateful to Jennifer and Alicia for joining us. They are two leaders from Oregon's Department of Human Services. Jennifer is the Family Preservation Manager for Self-Sufficiency and Child Welfare, and Alicia is the Assistant Deputy Director of Strategy and Innovation in Child Welfare. And so they have joined us to discuss what they find useful and helpful from this toolkit as it relates to data use in their child welfare agency. I have a couple questions for each of them, and so I think we are going to see them pulled to the screen. And Jennifer, I will ask you to speak first, but could you speak to which areas of the toolkit you find most useful and applicable for your work?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody. So in my current role, I'm managing a change effort across our self-sufficiency program, which is our TANF program, and child welfare across the state. So we all know that in any large-scale change effort like that, that culture is key. So for me, the most useful and applicable part of this toolkit is the strategies that Rosie was discussing earlier. So this toolkit in that first section really offers amazingly helpful and concrete, which is the best part, strategies around building a culture of data use at all levels. So both internally to the organization and also externally with our partners and legislators, which I also love that in the strategy section, each of those strategies comes with a spotlight on different organizations across the country and how they have moved their agency partners and staff toward this culture of data use. And that has been hugely helpful. So yeah, I see both of those areas, building culture and then specific examples of how other organizations have done that, really helpful, particularly around sustainability, which, you know, when you're implementing a change effort is absolutely key. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Those are really helpful reflections. Alicia, ask the same question of you.
I would also like to parrot what Jennifer said. Absolutely, yes. Culture will eat any sort of plan, process, implementation if you don't have it. So really changing the culture has been essential in the state of Oregon for us as we continue to dive into our data equity. For me, it was when we were looking at our overall program in child welfare, we work closely with self-sufficiency, which supports the TANF program. But when we're trying to build a transformative and community-powered continuous quality improvement program, we didn't have a roadmap. We didn't have anything that really laid out some of the essentials in building out data equity, data accessibility, data acumen and understanding to people who don't use data every day. Well, we were trying to build a system that was responsive, collaborative, and had feedback cycles for persons who have lived experience, tribes, partners, persons who are in the community and just want to see the outcomes for children and families to improve. So when you're building something and don't have a roadmap or don't have strategies, we found it a lot of lessons learned. And so when we had tangible examples of how to have, for example, ideal attributes for the data analyst positions, that gave us some context as we're building out the capacity of people internally, and then also finding persons who will match well with our vision for transformation externally. So when we're competing with the private sector, you're wanting to really deep dive into how long are they going to be here as we're investing in them and want to retain them. We have the competition of the private sector with the public, and really wanting to find people who are here and passionate about the work, who can live and breathe the mission and vision in our work, and incorporating the business aspects of data analysis, and then of course that computation, those hard skills. That's not something that we're grown up with in the state level. That's something that usually is grown and filled out in other realms. So we're having to pull them into our space and see how we can continue to build and grow that. Another strategy that I found to be particularly helpful was having the acknowledging that we have to build out the business acumen, the data acumen, and the building into the improvement lens of our data culture, and not using it as a hammer, but really using it from a lens of curiosity for improvement, so that we're defining and redefining the process and wanting to use those tools to help inform us on our next steps, versus punishing and shaming persons for, you know, maybe making a misstep or not putting in the data incorrectly or not looking at it properly. So really using the strategies that were in the toolkit around building out the internal staff first, to really put in some professional development and love into them, so that we could build out the team that was needed at the state of Oregon. I think those were the key pieces from the toolkit that I looked when I was looking through it that really were essential as part of building our program.
Thank you. That was really helpful to hear. I think what you were kind of speaking to around mission alignment is something we heard from a lot of our interviews about sustainability, is how they said the exact same thing. We're competing with private sector. And so when interviewing folks, it's really important to find those who are aligned with our mission so that they're more likely to stay. And so I think you will see questions in that tool trying to get at that with folks so that you can identify who is going to be that right fit. I want to leave a few minutes at the end for questions, and I think you both already spoke to some of the challenges that this toolkit has helped you address. But I wanted to leave it open for maybe one more minute. Jennifer, Alicia, if either of you had any specific challenge that you could point to that this tool or strategy would help you overcome.
The initial assessment, there's an assessment in the toolkit that helps you identify your current state in your environment. And there are tons of assessments out there to better understand where you are in terms of implementation, or wanting to better understand if your readiness for implementation. This one's specific to having the focus on data equity and the tools necessary to be successful. And so it helps give, you know, programs, jurisdictions, organizations the opportunity to do that assessment with the folks that you're working intimately with, so that you can better understand your environment to really hone in on some of those strategies and tools that are listed in the toolkit. So I found that to be very helpful. And when you're working with a child and family serving system, you're wanting that wide breadth of perspective and wanting to ensure that you're not just narrowly focused on one particular area on improvement or one area for implementation. So it gave a spectrum of areas and themes to really consider.
I think Alicia said it really well. You know, one of the things I think too is that there's very concrete things around like building champions, right? And I think what's really nice about this toolkit is it asks you to look both internally and externally. So doing that, like Alicia mentioned, that internal assessment, and then also really reaching out to other folks in the community, and you know, having this sort of piece of sustainability, where even, I think it says right in the toolkit that staff who don't work directly with data, because I have a lot of those folks, they can point to a data analysis or how they have considered data and use data in their decision making. And I think that's really important. That's a lot of the work that Alicia's team has done in Oregon to really work with folks who aren't data. You know, it's not their first piece of work, but really that we can have this culture where folks can say, I think this, but I can point to this data that really shows me if I think that, but is that actually what's going on? So that when we are implementing change, we're actually addressing the need or the barrier or the gap. So that's been really helpful, I think, with this too, just sort of broadening how we use data.
Great. Thank you both. yeah, that was super helpful to hear. I hope for folks on the call, it also gave you a sense of ways in which this toolkit can be useful for you. I wanted to briefly highlight that there is a current open call for applications for the TANF Data Collaborative Equity Analysis Awards. It's going to be a 3-year project focused on building data analytic capacity and completing equity-focused projects using TANF data. So if this would apply to you and you're interested, please use this link to apply. And then I wanted to, you can go to the next slide, but I saw one question pop in the chat about difficulty accessing data on undocumented persons. And so I will maybe speak briefly to this, and that I think that's a very common challenge across agencies and organizations. And so I do not necessarily have a good fix for how to access those data other than, you know, leaning on potentially non-administrative data sources when appropriate, whether it be through interviews or focus groups, to kind of understand about those experiences. But that, you know, there are challenges and limitations to administrative data and what is tracked in program systems. And this is kind of one of those really large ones. I don't know if anyone on the call would have anything to add to that, but I think I don't have a great answer for ways to overcome the challenge of accessing that information.